So we are in the middle of a series called Oh Brother, which is on the Epistle of James, and this will be our last week on this series. And the Epistle of James is a letter in the New Testament that was written by who we think was probably the biological half-brother of Jesus. So this is a guy who grew up with Jesus in his home as his big brother and eventually became convinced he was God in the flesh, which is kind of a big deal. I couldn't even convince my brother that I was a nice guy, much less worship me and bow down to me as God. But James eventually, as you'll see in just a moment, gave his life for Jesus. And so we consider this an important book. What did the biological half-brother of Jesus have to say about him? And if you watch the series, we don't know historically for sure this was the biological half-brother of Jesus. There's a couple other candidates, but the preponderance of evidence shows that it probably was, and we're kind of acting under that assumption, and even if it wasn't, it's an incredible book that we have a lot to learn from. So there's three reasons we've been doing this. One is because it's a different style of preaching. Normally I do what's called topical preaching. This is called exegetical preaching. It means I don't pick a topic like money or judgment or whatever, but instead we just go through the scriptures and say, what did the author want us to learn? That's exegetical preaching. That's what we've been doing. We also do it because we want you guys to understand that the scriptures are important and the scriptures have a lot to offer. I consider the scriptures to be kind of a living spiritual thing. And I talked to Nancy Deal this week, and she was talking about how she's read the book of James 40 times, and yet this time through, for some reason, she's just had new information downloaded to her that it's been absolutely new. And I think the scriptures are living and alive, and they apply to your life consistently and constantly. And so it's important that we dive into scriptures. And then third is so that we can meet new people. And today I'm going to be asking my wife to come join me in a little bit so she can share her thoughts on the book of James so that you guys can get the penultimate view on the wisdom of James from the wisest person I know conceivably. So that's why we do it. And each week I've been trying to add something about the scriptures or James or how Martin Luther thought about James. It was one of the weeks we talked about. It's just something interesting about the book of James. And I know you guys have been wondering what happened to Jimmy Camel Knees. And you probably at this point have absolutely no idea what that means. Jimmy is James, and Camel Knees turned out to be his nickname for a reason that you'll find out in just a second. But for a good portion of, they also called him James the Just because he was a justice guy. But James the Just eventually became known as Camel Knees, and I'll describe that in a moment. But you probably wonder what happened to James after this. He wrote this book. It was distributed to Jewish people who were scattered all over Asia and Africa. And then what happened to James after that? Well, James ultimately, as far as we can tell, was martyred for his faith. And there's a Roman historian named Josephus who wrote a book called Antiquities in kind of later first century. So let's call this 80 AD, just for ease. So Josephus wrote this. He was a non-Christian, and there's a couple passages in his book, Antiquities, that seem to verify some of the Christian stories, and this is one of them. And it talks about James. It says, Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, this guy we've been talking about, brought him, the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So external from the Bible, we find out from this person who is probably considered, scholars consider him probably the greatest historian of Rome at all. Like he's just heads and tails above anybody else talking about the history of Rome. And he says that James and his companions were stoned to death. Now where this gets dicey or questionable is there was a later author called Clement of Alexandria. And so if you go to Egypt, there's a place called Alexandria where you can go to the libraries there and see ancient literature. And Clement wrote something different. And we know that because this guy Eusebius wrote about Clement. So we don't necessarily have the original writings of Clement, but we have what was quoted of Clement earlier. And he says the manner of James' death has been already indicated by the above quoted words of Clement, who records that he was thrown from the pinnacle of the temple and when he was beaten to death with a club. So we have this question about, well, what did happen to James? Either way, he ends up in a poor situation, right? Nobody wants to be stoned to death or thrown from a temple. Neither of these sound appealing, but one of these may have happened. And this is ancient literature. We can't say we know positively, but what we can say is the greatest Roman historian of all time said he was stoned to death. And then this later church historian, writing in about the 2nd century, says he fell from the temple, he was thrown from the temple, and he was clubbed to death. Well, interestingly enough, Eusebius kind of solves this mystery for us, and he continues. He tells us about this guy. He tells us about James and what his life and his lifestyle were like, and he's a pretty fascinating dude. He was a hippie for sure. It says he was holy from his mother's womb. He did not drink wine or strong drink, nor did he even eat an animal. So he was a vegetarian apparently. So I have issues with this because bacon. No razor came upon his head. He did not anoint himself with oil, and he did not treat himself to a bath. Yeah. I'm sure that means he was not in the constant habit. Surely it doesn't mean his entire life he went without bathing because it's nasty. He alone was permitted to enter the holy place. So of the early apostles and disciples, you find out that James is kind of the most Jewish of them all. He's the one that kind of fights for the Jewish law to be integrated into the Christian system. And so he's apparently still very much involved with the Jewish temple and the Jewish way of doing things, the early Judaic way of doing things, in other words. But it says he was permitted in the holy place, for he did not wear woolen but linen garments. If you've read the Old Testament, you know that was a qualification for entering holy places. And he frequently entered the temple alone, and was frequently found situated upon his knees, asking forgiveness for the people, so that his knees became hard after the manner of a camel, on account of always bending down upon a knee while worshiping God and asking forgiveness for the people. So this is where he got his nickname, Camel Knees, is apparently his knees became hard and crusted from all the time he spent down on his knees in prayer. And then we find out that, so James was a powerful force in the early church. He was a guy that was really propagating Christianity. I'm the brother of Jesus and I'm convinced he's God. This is worth listening to. And he convinced a lot of people. Well, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, were not happy about this because a lot of Jewish people were becoming Christian converts and converting to this new radical faith. And so they still had a relationship with James. So they asked James to get up and preach to the people and try to deter them from following this Jesus, which was a big mistake. So he goes up on the temple, and this is what Eusebius writes about what James said. To the scribes and Pharisees' dismay, James boldly testified that Christ himself sitteth in heaven at the right hand of the great power, and shall come on the clouds of heaven. The scribes and Pharisees then said to themselves, we have not done well in procuring this testimony to Jesus. No joke. But let us go up and throw him down, that they may be afraid and not believe him. So they threw down the just man and began to stone him, for he was not killed by the fall, but he turned and kneeled down and said, I beseech thee, Lord God our Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then, so what happens is, he's up on the temple, he's preaching, they're wanting him to say, hey, guys, this thing's a big mistake. He doesn't do that at all. He says, Jesus is God, he's coming again. They're not happy about it, so they throw him off the temple. Then, as he hits the ground, he doesn't die. We don't know how tall how big this fall was, but they thought it was going to kill him, and it didn't. He sits up and he begs forgiveness for them. And somebody in the crowd, when he's being stoned, this is the ellipse that you see there, which that ellipse represents a person who stepped up and said, guys, listen, he's praying for us. And then one of the fullers, as an act of mercy, pulled out his club and hit him in the head with it and killed him. So now you see this mystery solved. Is Josephus says that he's been stoned to death. Clement of Alexandria later says that he was thrown from the temple and beat with a fuller's club. And what you find in Eusebius' account, which is about 300 AD, I don't know where he gets all his information. We don't know that this is true, but this is what ancient history has shown. This is the legend surrounding James, is that he was thrown from the temple for his faith, stoned when he hit the ground, and then finally finished off with a club. It's interesting, James. Today we're going to just kind of briefly do a synopsis of the book of James and what we've learned from it. And Kara's going to do most of that, and I'm just going to make a few comments because I want her to talk as much as possible. But he starts his epistle off with these words. He says, James, and think about this. This is his brother. He says, I'm a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So this is the context that James was written in, is the brother of Jesus, convinced he was God, says he's a servant. And to kind of wrap our brains around what that means, there's an old Catholic saint called Saint Hilary of Arles, and it's a dude named Hilary, which I think is unfortunate and difficult. It's like that, who wrote the song A Boy Named Sue? Johnny Cash. And please, I'm not getting into is gender a social construct and all that kind of stuff today. I'm just saying it would be unfortunate to be a man named Hillary. It would be very difficult. The guy orders a cup of coffee and he says, can I get a name for your order? And he says, Hillary, and he looks up and he's stroking his beard, and there's like this disconnect that happens. But it would just be challenging. And what is even worse is he was in a Latin context where Latin was spoke, and in Latin, Hillary is hilarious. So this saint's name is literally Saint Hilarious, which I just find fascinating. Dude orders a pizza and he says, "Can I get a name for this order?" He says, "My name is Hilarious." He says, "That's great, but what's your name?" Hilarious. Very challenging. I find it hilarious. So the reason I bring up Saint Hilarious is because Saint Hilarious wrote some commentary on the Epistle of James, and he focuses for a moment on the introduction of James saying, "I'm a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ," and what does that mean to be a servant? And he says this, he says, James refers to himself as a servant, but we must remember that there are two kinds of servitude, voluntary and involuntary. And therefore the involuntary servant is a slave who fears punishment, and therefore his service does not spring from love. But the voluntary servant is really no different from a son. And so Saint Hilarious said that James, this brother of Jesus, was a lot of times in the epistles, especially from Paul, you'll hear the word slave, which we rightly so consider to be a really negative word that we don't even want much in our vocabulary. But what he's saying is there's a time when you place yourself under someone in a voluntary capacity and you become like a child to them. And that's what this was with James, the brother of Jesus. It was a loving, compassionate relationship, and James became his servant in that capacity. He wasn't strong-armed into this position, but rather he just offered himself. And so that's where James starts. James, this amazing religious leader of his time who was really pushing the Christian church and really giving the Christian church momentum that it needed, was saying, look, this is who I am. I'm a person under Christ. The brother of Jesus was saying, I've placed myself under this person. And that's where it starts off for us as readers, is we read James, a servant of Jesus. What does that mean for us? When he's writing this letter, if he was a servant of Jesus, what does that say for us? And I'm going to invite my wife to come at this time. And I met my wife, and she was a junior college transfer when I was a campus minister, so I like them young apparently. And I thought she had really great legs and great hair. That was my first thought about Kara. And I soon found out that she's just an incredible, exceptional woman. And I wrote at our wedding that she has since become the standard by which I judge all women, which is unfair to every other woman. Hey.
Hey.
How you doing?
Can I use this?
No.
Why?
Yes, you can. I'm kidding.
Okay. You said you were going to let me talk, and I've got like 10 minutes here.
No, we've got 21 minutes.
Okay.
That's more than I gave anybody else.
Okay, that's good.
Are we going to fight here in front of everybody?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Go ahead.
So, Kara, take a moment to introduce yourself and talk about why I'm great.
We don't have time for that. Let's just move on. I'll get maybe in here. I'll get to it.
Okay. But do introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Kara. We've been married almost 15 years. We have 4 children. And I used to work at Murray State University before we moved here. I taught English as a second language for like 12 years. Then we moved here, and I had 3 more kids, and now I stay home with my children. That's about it.
All right. And last night she fought a mouse all night. Are we
Yeah.
telling that story?
No.
Okay,
No.
never mind. So how did you go about studying? How did you prep for this?
So James is one of my favorite books maybe my favorite book, because it's just very practical, and compared to like Romans is good, but I don't read it a lot because it's just, I don't know, too theological for me. This is just like, you need to do this, you need to do this. So I just read through each chapter and wrote down a few things from each chapter that stood out to me that I want to talk about.
All right, good. So I wanted to give her as much opportunity to talk today as possible, so I'm going to be very brief in what I have to say. And we are going to start with chapter 1. What I did was I went through and I pulled out little passages. So there's this concept out there that you should never read a Bible verse, meaning you should always read in context. And I'm just going to absolutely blow that rule out of the water today and talk about a few verses that stood out to me in this this epistle of James. And this one was the first one. He talks about how the trials of the church they're having a hard time, and how you should kind of find joy in trials because they'll develop your patience and character and perseverance. And then he concludes with this thought. He says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So this servant of Jesus, the brother of Jesus, when he sums up what it looks like to be religious, he says you give yourself up for somebody else and you don't get too entangled and get too cozy in this world. And so I think it challenges me on a personal level, because we try to do all these things to be properly religious. And what James says God accepts as pure religion is giving your life up for others. So as a pastor moment, when we have a service project in here, we say, hey, we're doing the St. Jude's retreat, go to mydaylightchurch.com. We're giving you an opportunity to do the greatest thing that you can possibly do. So if that doesn't guilt you into doing it, I have no idea what will. But Kara, what you got? Chapter 1.
So I like how he starts off. He just says, James, a servant of God, to all you 12 tribes, greetings. And then he gets right to it. And like Paul, when he wrote most of the New Testament, he writes, greetings to this person, love to you all, peace to you all. And James is like, greetings, and then boom. He's my kind of guy. I like how he writes. So he starts off by saying it's a good thing when you go through hard times, because if you don't quit, then you're going to lack nothing in life. And basically, I mean, everybody goes through hard times. Most of us are probably going through some kind of trial or struggle right now, some bigger than others. But don't quit. That's what he's saying. It's a good thing, because if you keep going and you persevere, good things are going to come from that. It doesn't mean the bad stuff is good. It just means if you don't quit and you keep going the right way, it's going to be okay. And I love that. And he talks about that a lot. That's a theme throughout several of the chapters. And just like if you're going to lift weights and you just, you do 1 or 2 reps and then you quit, it's going to do you no good whatsoever. If you're trying to practice, become a better runner, if you run, a quarter of a mile and then you quit, it's not going to do you any good. You got to keep going and persevere. So that's verses 1 and 2. Then the next part I really liked was the ask for wisdom and get it. And that is, I don't remember where, we don't have to know exactly which verse it is, but if any of you, I read the Amplified version, which is a lot wordier, so I'm just going to read part of it. But it says, if any of you is deficient in wisdom, let him ask of the giving God, who gives to everyone liberally and ungrudgingly, without reproaching or fault finding, and it will be given to him. So if you need help with something, like if you're, for me, like I'm meal planning, how can I be faster at, going to the grocery store because I've got 4 kids? Ask for wisdom. Something huge, like you had a huge fight with your dad or your mom and you don't know what to do about it, ask for wisdom. And in Proverbs it says, seek wisdom. Go after wisdom with everything you have. Go. Seek wisdom, seek wisdom, seek wisdom. And a lot of times we don't do that. We just try to figure things out ourselves. But God says if you ask for wisdom, he will give it to you. And so you just got to ask. And then the next part, this is like this is just so good. This is the best verse of the whole thing. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. It's the best verse for me anyway. If you take the opposite of that, be slow to listen, fast to speak, and quick to become angry. A lot of us are like that. We're the opposite of what we should be. I know I am. But we're supposed to be quick to listen. And it's just a good thing to do to practice listening to people before you talk. And a lot of times we want to speak first. We think we know, and we want to jump in there and say something, when really we just need to listen. And a lot of times say nothing. Just listen. And then be slow to speak, because maybe you don't really have anything good to say anyway. And maybe you do, but just be slow to speak and then slow to become angry. Anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires, is what he says. So don't get angry quickly. And that if you memorize one verse in the Bible, this is a good one to start with. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And then that's it for that chapter. Sorry. Is that okay?
For what?
Too long?
No, it was great.
Okay.
You're fantastic.
All right.
Just go.
No, I'm ready for chapter 2
all right,
now.
Good.
Okay.
So we talked during this series that there's a list of how to attain humility by ancient monks, and it's 8 levels, and the 7th level is talk less. Some of them are really deep and complex, and the 7th level towards achieving actual humility is talk less. And so that's why I'm trying to get Kara to talk so much today, is because I'm really humble. Chapter 2. Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. This is the rallying cry of Daylight Church and has been since its inception, is mercy triumphs over judgment. And when I read this, so James just kind of sums up like how to be right with God, how to be close to God. And he says, give your life over to orphans and widows. In other words, serve the people that have a hard time serving themselves. And then he says, show mercy. Be merciful people. Something that's really helped me in the Department of Mercy is to always remember that I'm not in someone else's shoes. When you see somebody doing something even atrocious, something really terrible, you don't know about their upbringing. You don't know about their brain chemistry. You don't know the reality of being them. And I think what Scripture says is always mercy, always mercy. God is the judge. God will judge. God knows. He knows their brain chemistry. He knows their circumstances. He knows their situations. So when somebody harms you, or if somebody confronts you or disappoints you, always assume the best of the person and let God figure out if there's some nastiness there. Kara, chapter 2, all yours.
Chapter 2. In the Amplified Version, it says, "Do not attempt to hold and practice the truth of our Lord Jesus Christ together with snobbery." So basically it means you can't practice being like Jesus if you're a snob. And when Sophia talked about this chapter, she talked a little bit about this, how we all have prejudices against people. It could be, people who play video games too much, you think, or people who, outdoorsy people. Maybe you think they're weird or something. Everybody, you like who's like you, usually. That's who you're comfortable with. You relate to people who are like you, usually, and that's who you're comfortable with. And it's easier to judge people who aren't like you because you don't understand them, like what he said. But James says that if you do that, you're not like Jesus. And a lot of what I wrote down was stuff about being judgmental and how we're not supposed to do that. And so I encourage you, whatever group of people or, type of people or whatever that you are uncomfortable around or you look down upon, to figure out why, to think about why do I feel this way? And to think about, maybe it was something your parents said, your friends in high school, whatever it is, think about the root of it and try to do the opposite of that and try to love those people more than you do other people even. Just try to spend time with some of those people. Try to get to know why they are like they are and just go flat against that thing in you that doesn't want to be around those kind of people. Go against it. And then verse 10, whoever does one wrong thing is the same as someone who has done all the wrong things. That's my interpretation. So we think, we just elevate, it's easy to elevate yourself and to think you're not as bad as other people. Everybody does that because you know yourself, you know your excuses, you know why you are like you are most of the time, and it's easy to think that you're okay and other people aren't as okay as you are. But we're supposed to do the opposite of that. We're supposed to look at ourselves and think, what's wrong with me? What do I need to change? What can I work on? Not what other people need to work on. It is not your job to change people, to fix people, to try to improve them. It is not up to you. It is not your responsibility. So I think we need to do the opposite and elevate other people and not cut ourselves as much slack a lot of times. And then 13, he talked about already, and in the Amplified Version it says, mercy triumphs, and it says, exults victoriously over judgment. So I said, did anyone ever help someone by being judgmental? Has any good ever come from that? The we are good and they are bad mentality just doesn't work in Christianity. It draws a line, and a lot of my church background was, we're good, they're not, we need to change them and help them and fix them. And, you could twist that a little bit. That's kind of okay, but really all you're supposed to do is love people. That's the only thing you can do. You can't change someone. Only God can do that, and all you can do is love them. And we have to be careful when we give advice and when we say bad things about people. And it's not what Jesus did. He loved everybody, no matter what they were like. And it's hard when people are different and you think these things are okay and these things are not okay, and I shouldn't spend a lot of time with people who do these things because I might become like them. And it's just, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus spent time with those people and he loved them. That was what he did. He loved them and he had mercy on them, and that's what we're supposed to do too. And the last thing, verses 18 and 20, I just wrote, faith does stuff. So the faith works, the whole controversy. But basically what I think is, if you believe in Jesus, if you believe in God, you need to do something. Don't just come to church and then go home and go about your life. You need to do something that shows that you believe in Jesus and that you follow him.
I'm going to try to fly on my point. 3:16 says, where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. And I'll just sum it up by saying that selfishness is the root of everything bad. And if you really want to work on yourself as a moral person, as a moral being, the trick is letting go of self. And so it's looking for areas to sacrifice. It's looking for areas to do things that you don't want to do for another person. That's the foundation, cornerstone of all moral growth, is to try to diminish self and, like Kara mentioned, esteem others and esteem God. Go for it.
I only got one thing for this chapter, and this is the chapter where it talks about your mouth and how, a whole ship can be steered by a small rudder, and a horse can be moved around just by the small bit in his mouth, this huge, powerful animal, and all you got to do is put a bit in its mouth, and it'll go wherever you want. Same thing with your mouth. Your words are very, very important. And what I wrote was to only say things in love, not to correct or show someone that they're wrong. A lot of times we want to give advice to people, but we're really wanting them to see that you're right and they're wrong. And I think you just need to be really careful when you give advice to anybody, because like I said before, sometimes all you really need to do is listen. People sort things out themselves as they're talking a lot of times. Now there's times when you should give advice to people, but I would do it very prayerfully, and if you're doing it in kindness. And I read this parenting book I was reading yesterday talked about 3 filters for all the words that you say. And the first one is truth, is what you're saying the truth. If it gets through that, not gossip. If it gets through that filter, is what you're saying kind. And the last one is what you're saying necessary. So most of the time we just say too much. We talk too much. We say things we shouldn't say. We should never talk about other people. Say something about someone that you wouldn't say in front of them. So is what you're saying true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? I never heard that actually, and I think it's a really good thing to think about before you talk.
Very good. For time reasons, we will scoot on to chapter 4. And I know this is drinking from a fire hose, so the hope and the goal is, one, that you'll think, wow, Scripture has a whole lot to say, and you'll start looking at it yourself. And then 2, maybe it'll spark something in particular. Maybe there'll be one little nugget that you get today that will revolutionize something for you. Verse 4 of chapter 4 was my first memory verse as a hellfire and brimstone Christian, which was, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred towards God? And it goes on from there to say, anyone who becomes a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God's. And it sounds very angry. And as we talked about in this series, it can be summed up by saying, don't get cozy here. And that's my whole synopsis of the book of James is that you have a couple places that you can invest your life, and where are you going to invest? Am I going to invest in what is temporary, what makes me feel good, what satisfies me right now, or am I going to invest in something existential, something beyond that, something transcendent, something past me and past my flesh and past my thoughts, which is other people and God? So again, the theme continues, other people and God. Go for it.
Okay, chapter 4, just a couple things.
And we have 6 minutes left, just so you're aware.
I'm good. I think it's good to ask for contentment, to be content. And he talks about comparing yourself to other people and being jealous and wanting what other people have. And if you go to like a thrift store, you go to Once Upon a Child, I was there this week, there's clothes just stuffed in there because people have, and these are clothes kids probably wore one time. I mean, back in the day, you had 3 outfits and you wore them till they were threadbare, and then you sewed those up and you kept wearing them. And now we have so much stuff. And I think contentment is something we should go after and seek, and not wanting more all the time. That's a whole other sermon. And then verses 7 and 8, submit to God. I read in a book once that the only prayer we need to really say is, yes, Lord. Those 2 words, yes, Lord. If you would just say that, 10 times on your way to work, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. I know it's simple, but it's really powerful just to say, whatever you want, I'll do. Whatever you say, I'll do. That's a great prayer. And then 13 through 16, it talks about you who say, tomorrow we're going to go here and then we're going to go there, and you have these plans for your life, but we know very, very little. Tomorrow, what if, there's I'm not this going to happen, a nuclear bomb hits the other side of America, our whole lives are changed forever. Things completely change. We're worried about survival. We're going to, start growing our own food. Everything's going to change. We think we know, we have all these plans for retirement and everything, and that's why you've got to say, yes, Lord, because you have no idea what's going to happen, and you need to be close to Him. Okay?
You're really good at this.
I don't
even know why I ever
talking
preach.
fast.
5:7, be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. And this is one we would just kind of skirt over and go, oh, wow, another agricultural analogy in Scripture. He says, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. And he's saying this to a dispersed people who have lost everything. But they're people that have invested in God. They've put God as their center. And so his encouragement is, there's a concept in Christianity that's connected to what people describe as the prosperity gospel a lot, and I think there's a lot of truth in it and a lot of odd stuff in it as well. But it's called seed faith, and it's this idea that what you plant in the ground is what you get. So if you plant apples, you're going to get apples. If you plant oranges, you're going to get oranges, and so forth. And the idea is that what James is saying here is invest, plant something important so that what you get is important. He's saying, wait, you've invested in God, you've invested in your spiritual life, you've invested in something sound and powerful. And even though things look awful right now, the nuclear bomb has gone off across country and you're growing your own food and everything is messed up, trust that what you've planted is going to grow. And God is faithful. That's what James is saying here. He's saying it doesn't look like God's being faithful right now, but God is faithful. The investment that you have made will reap dividends. Trust him.
And that's the same verses that I had, 7 and 8, about waiting on the Lord, because these days we don't have to wait much. I mean, used to you had to saddle up the horse, you know. I like talking about the old days for some reason, I don't know why. If you wanted to go to Shepherdsville, it would take you 3 hours on a horse and buggy or something, you know, and all that time is waiting. Now we want fast internet. I can find out anything almost on the internet instantly. My kid asked me, do whales spit? I don't know. Let me ask Siri. Instantly, I can find out stuff. And because of that, waiting is so hard. But when you plant stuff, you have a garden, you can't hurry it. You can't make the corn grow any faster. I mean, you can put some fertilizer on it, it's going to help a little bit. But everything in nature takes time. Trees grow slowly. The seasons, the sun rises in the same amount of time and it sets. It doesn't get faster as time goes on because we want it to. Nature's slow, nature takes time. And we have to realize that God doing a process in our life is a good thing. And persevering, enduring, and keeping going, the seeds that you planted, the good stuff that you've done, you know you're doing the right thing, but it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Things are so hard, just putting one foot in front of the other, but just keep going. Whether it's a health thing or a spiritual thing, you just feel like you're just bored with life, whatever. Just keep going, keep asking for wisdom. The seeds that you planted, plant good ones, and it's going to come to pass. You're just going to have to wait for it.
So summary, we've got a minute each to summarize. My summary with the book of James is don't get cozy here. That's from beginning to end is the idea that this world is messed up, it's jacked up. Don't make your investment here. Invest in what is transcendent. Invest in God, invest in loving others, and you will see that God's going to come through for you in time. Mine
would be ask for wisdom, don't talk too much, and don't quit.